Tonight's essay is by archaeologist Jeff Oliver. He discusses the ancient ritual of tree carving and asks how illicit marks made on trees inform our understanding of the history of places we think we know. Suggesting that tree carving is the rural cousin of modern-day graffiti, Jeff explains how studying such subversive messages from the past can help to repopulate places with the people that history traditionally forgets.
A busy B road north of Sheffield may seem an unlikely place to appreciate an archaeological landscape. There are no obvious signs of antiquity, and yet the patient observer will be rewarded. North of the village of Grenoside, on the shoulder of a noisy strip of asphalt running east of Warncliffe Woods, is a long border of some 50 mature beech trees. Records tell us that they were planted in the 19th century to improve the view, but they provide more than just an attractive frame for an old road. The trees form a continuous mural of carvings strung out along the route for all to see. Deeply incised into their stretched, silvery bark are clusters of blocky writing that depict first or last names and date marks from the early decades of the 20th century. It would be difficult to trace the individual authors of all these deliberate marks, yet despite their anonymity, they provide clues which tell us something of the changing history of this place. When the carvings were made, the car was still a luxury. Public transport was limited, except in the city. Local journeys were still commonly made by foot, as happened throughout Britain more generally. Considering how traffic speeds through this landscape today, and the fact that inscriptions have not been fashioned here for more than half a century, what's most peculiar about this place is its former pace of life. From the privileged view of hindsight, what the names and dates seem to suggest is a form of intimacy with this landscape, in marked contrast to the detached experience of today's travellers who whiz by in their cars. The act of tree carving is not at all like the hurried penmanship of a writer, or the airbrush strokes of the urban graffiti tagger. It requires a good knife, a bit of elbow grease, and time to spare. The carvings speak of less hurried engagements with place, of quarrymen or agricultural labourers on their walk to work, of soldiers marking their presence on their way to war, or local people punctuating their journey to or from the Grenoside pubs. They speak of lingering presences. To an archaeologist, these marks provide an important record about the character of daily journeys almost 100 years ago. They serve to populate this now deserted roadside. Archaeologies often placed emphasis on deciphering systems of writing. Were it not for the decoding of the cuneiform tablets of Mesopotamia, the Rosetta Stone of Egypt, or the Linear B script of Mycenae, we would know a good deal less about some of the most celebrated ancient cultures. But what about forms of writing and inscription which are not part of more established conventions, or blatantly disobey the rules? What about graffiti? Contemporary archaeologists have begun to turn their attention away from symbols of authority towards the daubed, painted, and scratched writings of the disadvantaged, the excluded, or the subversive in society. Graffiti itself is often considered to be a symptom of urban decay, a visual contagion of modern times which infects the ordered character of our cities and towns. Some may find it unsightly or threatening, but it can also tell us something about the character of places and the lives of forgotten people from the recent or distant past. From jocular wall writings scrawled on farm buildings by early 20th century agricultural laborers to the occult graffiti of Cold War military bases, archaeological research is beginning to tap into past social tensions that have for the most part gone unexplored. Because forms of graffiti can be found from many periods and places, wherever people felt a desire to voice opinions, from Roman Pompeii to 21st century London, it can shed light on the lives of people who might not otherwise have been the subject of more conventional narratives. Popular culture tends to place graffiti in an urban context, on walls of concrete, brick, or stone, but it's astonishing how graffiti gets around. If we expect it to show up on the rough side of town, one of the most unusual places to find such phenomena is surely the green spaces beyond the city limits. Like the daubed affirmations we would all recognize in an alleyway or on garage doors, trees too are commonly adorned with graffiti, or more properly tree carving, spray paint's royal cousin. In fact, tree carvings are so ordinary that country lanes, recreational woodland, and ramblers' pathways routinely preserve historical dialogues between people and places in the living bark of trees, with the smooth bark species such as the beeches near Grenoside being the carver's perennial favorite. In these places, the most familiar categories of carvings are engraved names and dates on lower trunks. Their ubiquity at times assaulting the senses like a cacophony of voices, drowning out the solitude of natural places. Other recognizable forms include symbols such as emblazoned hearts, encompassing the initials of lovers. It's tempting to see such declarations when found in secretive places as marking furtive trysts, while carvings openly displayed seem to proudly mark fleeting or age-old love affairs. More politically motivated carvings are also common, with symbols such as swastikas, marijuana leaves, and pentagrams challenging thresholds of social acceptability. So perhaps it's their ever-present nature and assumed transparency that explains why tree carving as an archaeological record has lay hidden under the radar of serious academic study for so long. In short, we're blind to them, and we assume that they're made without much thought. Tree carving is not specific to any given culture. Rather, incisions and marks on trees have provided us with insight about how such inscriptive acts could intervene in society in other times and places. In Western Canada and Australia, anthropology has shown how Indigenous peoples carved and painted geometric, human, and animal-like symbols on trees for a variety of reasons. Some were important for navigation around vast landscapes. Marks on trees acted like road signs, helping to point the way through dense forests and bush country. Others, such as ritualistic carvings, represented benevolent beings, ancestors, or tricksters, which demanded different forms of respect, offering glimpses into cosmologies very different from those of Europeans. These could mark burial sites, signify clan totems, or even represent the frenzied dreams of initiates on the transformative journey from youth into adulthood. Early European references to tree carving can be found in classical literature, where the act of tree carving was typically seen as an attribute of lovers frolicking in an Arcadian paradise. Like much else from the classical opus, the lover's motif was continually reinvented from the Renaissance until the 19th century, where it became an accepted literary and artistic symbol of a romantic intent, widely reproduced in paintings and poetry, a convention which was understood as much by artists as their audiences. When we inscribe our names within the sign of the heart, we're following a tradition that has been around as long as our collective memory. But these literary and artistic sources of information are just the starting point. It's up to the archaeologist to take these marks seriously, otherwise discussion on the subject might just end here, with tree carvings a rather modest footnote to history. If trees can play creative or disruptive roles in narratives about places, such as the oak tree's transformative role in English history, then surely writing on the trees multiplies this potential for historical understanding. However, attempting to understand the meaning of carvings relies on more than just decoding incised symbols or script. It requires us to place them in context. Standing on the windswept Ridgeway in Oxfordshire is the Neolithic long barrow of Wayland's Smithy. With sweeping views over the Vale of the White Horse, the Ridgeway has formed an important travel corridor since at least late prehistory, and continues to be a favorite long-distance footpath for ramblers investigating the region's archaeology. According to historical sources, the acknowledgement of Wayland's Smithy as an archaeological site, an indelible part of Britain's heritage, seems to date to 1810, when a ring of beech trees was planted around the plough-damaged barrow in an effort to separate it from the cultivated fields beyond. Integral to the idea of this circle of trees was to create a picturesque frame around the barrow that would focus the visitor's attention inwards towards the monument. But judging by the attention paid to the trees themselves, the story of this place as a monument to prehistory can only be described as an ambiguous one. What immediately strikes the visitor is the amount of tree carving literally covering the trunks of the beech trees, like posters on a notice board displaying opinions, symbols, and memorials that reflect the varied ways in which this place has been both used and perceived through time. The oldest legible carving is a date. It reads 1868, and like many of the early examples, a number of which show clear 19th century origins, it has the characteristic stretch marks of age. Trees grow in girth over time, and so messages carved in their bark will eventually be pulled apart and stretched open, making words and symbols less easy to read. But if we consider that it takes 40 or 60 years for a beech tree to grow a suitable trunk to carve, such a date may represent one of the first carvings at the site. In the 19th century, Wayland Smithy became an important site for antiquarian musing, so it's conceivable that early carvings relate to such visits. Certainly by 1889, no fewer than 11 published articles served up theories on its enigmatic origins. However, antiquarianism was not the only reason people chose to visit. Among the growing middle class, leisure time was increasingly spent in recreational activities, and the Long Barrow became part of regular excursions for groups such as the Oxford Natural History Society, who helped to popularize ancient monuments to both professional and lay audiences alike. So choosing to commemorate such visits by carving in the trees at a time when photography was not yet widespread may have served as a fitting record of their visit. Not all were in favor of the inevitable wear on the site caused by the public. Echoing today's debate over whether graffiti is art or vandalism, the town clerk of Abingdon was said to be greatly disturbed by ramblers who enjoyed numerous picnic fires next to the barrow's megalithic entrance. As if in reply to this remark, one group of picnickers were audacious enough to commemorate the event by carving "Picnic, September 8th, 1896 into one of the trees, a behavior that was widely condemned as destructive to nature. Reflecting the continuity of this place as a site for recreation, on the opposite side of the same tree, the words "Picnic, September 8th, 1996 are proudly scored, exactly 100 years later. Such evidence not only serves as a form of archaeological record, but also demonstrates how carvings seem to entice dialogue, more commonly seen with urban graffiti. The date 1914 appears prominently at the site no fewer than 4 times, more so than any other. While it's difficult to establish the significance of dates, this apparent clustering may suggest the marking of the first salvos of the Great War. It's not hard to imagine different scenarios where one might choose to memorialize such an event. Separations felt between loved ones or the death of family members would have been enough to inspire commemorative acts. Equally, of course, they may have been offered as more nationalistic gestures. Either way, the carvings are suggestive of how an antiquarian's tumulus became reframed as a memorial to one of humanity's bloodiest conflicts. Taken as a whole, the carvings seem to vie for attention with the monument itself. In fact, so conspicuous are the carvings that for some people the trees have become as important a part of their enjoyment and experience as the barrow itself. While the megalithic entrance to the tomb draws people initially to the Long Barrow, many eventually wander off to investigate the carvings. Moving around the trees, the presence of these historical voices is palpable, and many visitors trail their fingers across the heavily scored bark of the trunks. In so doing, they may find the recently incised Japanese character which squares off with a BNP slogan. They may feel the deep cut marks where Becky and Steve materialize their love for one another, while the more exploratory visitor might disturb brambles to find that A.C. Taylor visited this same spot in 1900 and again in 1912. Such investigative readings, of course, often inspire new interventions, so that the carvings and their entwined histories become increasingly elaborate. Indeed, the way their authors linger like ghosts could be said to interfere with the ability of Wayland Smithy to have a contained and knowable history. In the same way that the reworking of the monument in prehistory, or the early 19th century helped to frame its meaning, the graffiti on the trees has once again elaborated and challenged the way we think about this place. Like urban graffiti, tree carving is often maligned or ignored. But the archaeological record of ordinary people inscribed on the bark of living trees provides a novel, if somewhat unorthodox means of exploring the history of places with seemingly uncontroversial pasts. Such marks can change the way we see landscapes, infusing dynamic, fluid, and conflicting perspectives on places we often assume to be ageless, static, or just plain dull. To acknowledge such marks, as can be found in almost any wood, is to respect ordinary voices and the stories they tell.
Tonight's essay was presented by Jeff Oliver.